servant enduring, suffering servant enduring the pain of the cross. King Jesus, you are worthy, you are worthy. King Jesus, you are holy, you are holy.
You're listening to the Centrepoint Vineyard podcast. We're a church on Sydney's northern beaches with Jesus and his kingdom at the centre. We hope this message is an encouragement to you.
King Jesus, you are worthy, you are worthy.
All right. Morning all. It's great to be here bringing the message to you this morning. Bear with us. This is our first time up here doing this, so I might need a little bit of grace. But rest assured we have prepped and we are excited. So let's dive in. Just to recap, if you weren't here last week, Jonathan kicked us off in our new series, Psalm 23 we're looking at. He reminded us that the shepherd, God, our friend and companion, is all we need, and challenged us that our trust structures, things we find ourselves leaning on for security or identity, the things we think we need to make us happy or okay, often actually let us down. And we were reminded that true comfort can only be found in God, and we need to let him restore our souls. We were challenged to let go of our own trust structures and rest in God's goodness. So moving on to the next section of Psalm 23, we've titled this morning's talk, Fear No Valley, Trust the Shepherd Who Guides. And as we were preparing this week, we kept coming back to these three sort of main points that we wanted to unpack with you all today. So don't fear the valley, trust the shepherd, and walk closely with God. And we'll be coming back to these in a little bit.
Alrighty, so to start, you always start with a story, right? As you can see beautifully here, 2 years ago, Meg and I went on a big holiday to Europe for 4 months, which was an amazing and fantastic trip. And the last part of that holiday was spent on the Emerald Isle, which is Ireland, in a camper van. Now, to say this was an adventure would be a massive understatement. So 10 nights in that van, going around Ireland. We spent a third of our trip at the mechanics. A blown tyre on the first day. And I mean properly blown, like exploded as we were driving. And also the ABS turned off as we were going around the Ring of Kerry, which is a beautiful, windy, narrow road on the west coast of Ireland, which was fantastic. And lastly, to cap it all off, our final night of the trip was spent, almost ironically with today, in a valley. A terrifying night of trying to sleep through what was called later on Cyclone Betty. Literally a cyclone. This was pretty dark, loud and scary night, and I claim that I was fine. But I know Meg was genuinely quite terrified for our lives. It was a very strange 24 hours that we'd had though, because weirdly enough, the very next morning, which is these photos here, it was incredibly calm, beautiful, and serene. Think, blue skies, birds chirping, Disney movie, which was such a sweet relief from the night that we'd had before. This peaceful break of day was a beautiful reminder where the Lord said, "See, don't worry, I've got your back." It's odd though, because in hindsight, when I reflected logically and did my research afterwards, that there was no possible way that the wind speeds and gusts from Cyclone Betty were ever going to blow over our 4.5-ton van. So our fear was completely irrational, but in the moment, it really felt like our lives were at stake here. So much so that Meg called her mother in Australia, on the other side of the world, asking for help, in which she responded with, "There's nothing I can do." Meg's instinct was to cling onto something of this world, which was her trust structure, if you like, to provide her the comfort that she thought she needed, when in reality, the only person who was there in that moment with us was God. Today, we want to unpack a little bit of how God can work in our dark valleys and what it means to walk alongside him knowing we don't need to fear because he is guiding us.
So let's all get out our Bibles, whatever form that might be, because we are going to look quite closely at each part of the Psalm 23. I will just read it, the full thing for us to get started. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So we're just focusing today on the middle part there, starting with he guides me along right paths for his name's sake. And to help us with this idea of right paths for his name's sake, we're actually going to jump to another part of the Bible, looking at Peter and Andrew when they were called to follow Jesus and become his disciples. So from Matthew 4:18 to 20, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. So in this familiar story, we read of two fishermen, Peter and Andrew, who thought they were on the right path until Jesus came along and had another idea, another path that he wanted to lead them down, another trajectory to take their life. And Andrew and Peter were obedient in saying yes to that right path because they trusted the God that was calling them. As we see in the story, Jesus guided them along the right path for his name's sake. And we know that because Peter and Andrew went on and they played a crucial role in the history of the early church and spreading the good news. Right paths are straight and narrow paths. They're not always easy. And Andrew and Peter had to give up their life as they knew it, which is definitely no small ask. And I do wonder, how many of us here today would be willing to give up our life as we know it to follow Jesus completely? Knowing this could actually look quite different to the life that we live now. Just as Andrew and Peter's right path looked very different for them, being fishermen, as it did for God, whose idea was actually he wanted them to become his first disciples.
Meg and I have both experienced this tension of our path versus God's path in our own lives, as I'm sure some of you may have as well. Last year, for example, I finished a software engineering course to start working in the industry, but was finding it hard to get my foot in the door. I applied for over 130 jobs with no bites. I had 2 phone interviews, which nothing back from it. So what did I do? Well, I can't just sit around doing nothing. I went and got a job at Hugo's restaurant at Manly Wharf. Some of you may or may not know it. In a hospitality job, working with people in a completely different stage of life. Think 18 years old, just finished HSC. What ATAR did you get? And I'm there as a 27-year-old married for 3 years. In a completely different stage of my life. Working with them, and to be completely honest with you, I was quite angry with God. This is something I had prayed about and I'd considered, and I felt like it wasn't going the way that I thought it had planned. I was meant to be coding, not serving people their crab spaghettinis. But of course, God was at work and I was indeed on the right path. I just didn't know it. So throughout my whole time at Hugo's, the restaurant, I was trying to work and do it for God's glory. And I was trying to be an example of Jesus in a place where, honestly, there was not much Jesus. Yeah.
Those that know Hugo's.
Eventually, in God's perfect timing and by his goodness, I did secure a role at Macquarie Group, which is better than I could have ever hoped for at the start of it all. And it's only now looking back, I can see God's guidance through it all. And all that time, I was indeed on the straight and narrow without even knowing it. It just didn't look like how I, in my humanness, thought it would look. He guides me along right paths for his name's sake. An important point for us all to remember is that the path we are on is his path, and it's for his glory. In whatever job, city, relationship, family, community, sports team, church we are in, we are doing it to bring him honour and glory. God gets the glory through our story. It's about who we are living for and honouring through our lives and who we represent each and every day. And it's often with hindsight that we can see God's sovereign control in our lives, like me and Hugo's. And it becomes about trusting in our shepherd to guide us and get us to where he wants us to go, even if that route is through the valley. So I'd like to encourage us this morning to think about whatever path we are each currently on. I know we're all on very different paths, but we're all brought together here at church. And whether we're bringing glory to our Father in what we're doing. If it's not bringing honour to his name, then I would challenge you that either perhaps we could invite him into it a bit more, do it alongside him, walk closely with him, or it could be a case that we're not on the right path at all. And we need to turn back to him and be obedient to where he's calling us. We need to trust God, trust the shepherd, that his path is the best path for us, and walk closely with him so we can hear him and be guided by him.
So in this part, even though I walk, I think David using the word walk is quite interesting. Walking is this forward motion. There's movement and purpose and progression. The Bible actually talks a lot about our relationship with God being a walk. And David doesn't say, when I'm stuck in the valley, he uses the word walk. So I think we can really take comfort in that even though the valley is often this hard place, we're actually still going forward, we're still progressing, we're still overcoming, and we're doing it with Jesus by our side. You don't have to be living on this earth for long to realise that it's far from perfect. The world we live in will always be presenting us with challenges. There's always going to be valleys. Valleys are inevitable. Dark, tough, difficult times that we go through, where we feel we have moments, seasons, or times of being in a valley. But more broadly speaking, we can also view the valley as our whole life here on earth. And as we come out the other side, that's when we get to see and experience the full goodness of eternity in heaven with the Father. The world is broken, this valley that we live in. It does have an opening, it does have an end, and that is when God will make all things new. We say it a fair bit here at Centrepoint, but it's that living between the now and the not yet. God is guiding and moulding and shaping us through the dark points in our life. And he's alongside us every step of the way. God does some of his best work in the midst of our pain. He doesn't cause the pain, but he definitely uses these moments to refine and to shape us. As we read in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So God uses all things, even the valleys, for his good, our good, and his glory.
Now, Charles Spurgeon was an English theologian, I'm sure some of you know him, from the 19th century, and he said, "The shadow of a dog cannot bite, the shadow of a sword cannot kill, the shadow of death cannot destroy us. Let us not, therefore, be afraid." The darkest valley is not death, but just the shadow of death. It has lost all its substance, and a shadow can't stop you from getting to your destination. And it's because of this fact that we will fear no evil. Here David uses will. He says, "I will fear no evil." He is confident in the God that he knows. He does not say that there will be no evil. He doesn't say there will be no suffering. He doesn't say there will be no hardships. He says he will fear no evil. He reminds us that God is with us, guiding us and shaping us. And ultimately, Jesus has won the final battle over death. Death no longer has any substance or power. It is a shadow which has no presence or stronghold over us. For you are with me. Here there is a shift from the previous verses in the psalm where David goes from talking about God to talking to God. David is talking directly to God. And this emphasizes the relationship that we can have with God and with Jesus. It's a personal relationship. In the first part of the psalm that Jonathan took us through last week, David uses he, H-E, when talking about God. And now we see him use you, showing God is relational and close. He's not a distant God. When we were reading this verse in our NLT Bible, it actually uses the word beside in place of the word with. When we are in the valley, he is close beside us. He is not in front and he is not behind.
Isaac and I sometimes like to go for a walk, as I'm sure we all do. And when we leave our place in Lane Cove, we step right out onto Burns Bay Road. If you don't know Burns Bay, it's a main road, very loud, 60 kilometre an hour zone, more like cars speeding past at 70, sometimes more, winding down this hill. Let's say the road is on this side, since we're positioned here. So cars speeding down the hill here. And the council has generously provided a footpath of about 30 centimetres wide for us to walk on. And so as we go along on this relaxing, nice walk, what feels like we're walking along the M5, Isaac refuses to walk anywhere else but beside me. He won't walk in front and he won't walk behind. He insists on being beside me to protect me. He likes to think that maybe by being beside me, he'll either protect me from if a creepy person was to pull over and, I don't know, try to take me or something, or B, take the brunt of the hit if a car was to come colliding off the road, up the curb and onto the sidewalk. Although I think if that happened, we'd both not be in a good way. In any case, him being beside me is the most comforting place that I can have him, because he can't do as good of a job of protecting me if he's in front or if he's behind. And just like with us and our walk with God, I love the image of God being beside us. If he was in front, it would just be him leading us. And if it was behind, it would just be him giving us free rein and control, kind of you do you, maybe even showing us he doesn't really care what we do or where we go. But I think he does care because he's beside and we're in it together. And although perhaps we know this as head knowledge, like, yes, God is with us in the hard times, I think we all are probably guilty of still looking elsewhere for help. It should be enough that God is with us, but we still seem to grab hold of something else that we think is going to help us. Just like me lying in the van through Storm Betty that night, calling my mum, who was literally on the other side of the world, thinking that in some way she could help me. And I was totally forgetting that God is enough.
David reiterating that you are with me here reminds us to not fear the valley. Valleys are inevitable, but they're not permanent. The valley might be deep, might be dark, might be hard, might be wet and rainy, but it's often a place of shaping and growth, and with God by our side, there is no reason to fear, for you are with me. God's presence is our greatest comfort. Is there a valley maybe in your life presently, or that you know is to come in the future that you are fearing? Like my time at Hugo's, where I felt annoyed, uncomfortable and angry, and out of place, honestly. I look back and I can actually see God's guidance in hindsight. He was shaping me, he was forming me, giving me patience, and teaching me the wisdom of being who I was in that situation. So how can we give God control in our valley and let him comfort and guide us through it? We don't need to fear the valley, but instead walk with the Lord through it and trust the shepherd who guides us. The valley can actually be an amazing place of formation. Now, as we look at the final part of the psalm that we're talking through together, I'd like to ask you, at what point in your life, at what stage or age, I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this, did you feel the most freedom? At what age or stage in your life did you feel that you had the most freedom? And if you haven't thought of an answer, that's okay. But for me, reflecting on this personally now as an adult, I would say that when I was a child was when I felt the most freedom. And I'll note that this experience may not have been the same for everyone. But interestingly enough for me, being a child was also the time where I felt I had the most freedom, but also the time I probably had the most boundaries. And people disciplining me and guiding me, think teachers, parents, coaches, family. Now, a team of landscape architects in Scandinavia conducted a simple study to observe the physical and psychological influences of having a fence around a playground and how its consequent effects would impact preschool children. So what they did was they observed teachers and their students surrounded by a fence, and on a comparable playground with no fence, the researchers found that the children on the playground without fences tended to congregate around the teacher, reluctant to stray from the teacher's view. Whereas on the playground that was fenced in, The children ran around, all around the playground, right to the edges, exploring and feeling free to test the boundaries. The fence and knowing their boundary helped them to be able to embrace the extent of the area. Kind of similar to out there where you see all the kids go right up to the fence. When we know our boundaries, we have confidence to live to the full extent of the freedom that God gives us.
Now, if you're not too familiar with the ways of shepherding or have no experience in the field like me, you may find this next slide helpful. The Hebrew word for rod, shebet, here in this verse simply means a stick with a variety of applications used to defend or to discipline. The Hebrew word for staff, mishenor, seems to speak of a support in the sense of a walking stick. And from my extensive knowledge of shepherds, I believe they use the staff to guide the sheep, as well as to rescue them out of whatever troublesome situations sheep seem to find themselves in. The shepherd doesn't get stuck into them and bash them and beat them and get angry with them. He actually rather gives them little taps, little nudges, to keep them from going off track and getting into trouble or getting lost. Tim Keller says guidance is something that God does, more so than something God gives. As we walk with him, we bring our brokenness to God, and as our shepherd, he comes alongside us and he guides us and he comforts us. He is the one in control. It's also important to note here that the word discipline is meant as a word that indicates instruction, correction, or guidance, which is ultimately aimed at providing moral growth and improvement. It's not supposed to be a scary thing. God's not looking to chastise or berate us, but to walk alongside us, little taps, little nudges, to keep us moving along, keep us on his course and his plan for our lives. And we have the Holy Spirit with us at all times to do that. In Isaiah 55:9, where God is speaking through the prophet Isaiah, it says, "For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts." We need to trust that God's ways are better than our own ways. The concept of living a life completely controlled and guided by God rather than controlling it ourselves is actually quite scary. But we can find comfort in knowing that God's ways are higher and greater than ours. We can trust and find comfort while living under God's discipline and plan. In a society that tells us to follow our own whims, our own desires, following God's plan and admitting, hey, maybe actually I don't know what's best for me, is quite countercultural and difficult. But there is peace and comfort in God's rule and his plan for our lives. His rod of discipline and his staff of guidance comfort us through it. There's comfort in God's goodness and in his discipline. True godly freedom does not equal no rules. Freedom equals discipline, support and guidance from one that knows better than us. So I encourage us to adopt a childlike faith and to humble ourselves and to let God discipline and lead us.
Now, as a final point of reflection before we wrap up, I thought we could have a think as well. Is there something in our lives that we feel that God needs to discipline us in? Perhaps to guide us, to support us, or maybe something to rescue us from. Maybe we need reminding this morning that it's his rod and staff that do this for us. I encourage you to bring that to the Lord this morning and ask him to intervene. We are all just sheep at the end of the day, and we all, no matter what path we are on, need guidance and discipline, as well as someone trustworthy who's going to be there to defend us, support us, and rescue us when we need rescue. We can find comfort in God's discipline, knowing that he is the one tapping and nudging us onto the right path. When we are walking closely with the Lord, he gently reminds us, hey, trust me, this way. Come on, let me show you. Now, Tim Keller, as we mentioned before, he also has famously said, is our shepherd out of touch with reality? Hardly. Jesus is the only shepherd that knows what it's like to be a sheep. Jesus truly knows and understands our humanness and brokenness. He knows we are going to need guidance and discipline through our darkest valleys. We truly have no need to fear the valley, because when we are walking closely with him, we can trust in the shepherd who guides us.
So how about we all stand? And I just thought we could close with this ancient prayer. This prayer is from Columba of Iona. He was an Irish monk, abbot and missionary from the 6th century who played a crucial role in spreading Christianity throughout Scotland. Let's pray. Be a bright flame before me, O God, a guiding star above me. Be a smooth path below me, a kindly shepherd behind me this morning and forever. Alone with none but you, my God, I journey on my way. What need I fear when you are near, O Lord of night and day? More secure am I when in your hand than if a multitude round me stand. Amen.
Thanks so much for listening. To find out more, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, centrepointvineyard.org. Music is King Jesus by Sam Glover.
Pain of the cross, King Jesus, you are worthy, you are worthy. King Jesus, you are holy, you are holy. Only Son, how we love thee, how we love thee. King Jesus.